Hi, Cathy here from Eclectic Images. Now today's tutorial is following on from our introduction to our Rosebud stamp set where we road tested the set, and it's going to be doing a similar technique with using the layers of the stamp but using a different type of ink, so you can see how different inks work on the solid and the shadow stamps, just to give you an idea of what inks you might have at home that you can work with this stamp set. Okay, so what we're going to be using is the Rosebud stamp set. We'll use some of our splatter stamp for some background and also some of the B-Arty Damask stencil to create a background as well. We'll be doing some embossing with some Ranger copper embossing powder. Our inks today, we'll have a little bit of VersaFine Clear for some outlines, but our main stamping, our colour, is going to be the Versamgic Chalk inks. And today I've decided to use an aqua palette with just a little bit of Sahara sand. I find aqua and brown go really well together. And of course some Versamark for when we do our embossing. So now as I discussed in the road testing of the rose stamp, there's different ways that you can make it easier to line the stamp up. So one way is to actually have a scrap piece of paper the same size as your bit of card that you're going to stamp onto. Stamp it onto there with your stamp positioner or stamp press, and then when you take that away, your stamped images are going to come exactly where you want them on your main bit of card. So you can keep putting your scrap bit in to stamp all the various layers and know that those layers are going to come out in the right spot. The other way that you can do it, and I'll try and go between both a little bit, the other way that you can do it is to actually stamp your rose first in a very soft ink like the grey. So we can do the VersaFine Clear Grey, which is actually Morning Mist. So we can do that and give ourselves an outline, do all our layering of our colours, and then once those chalk inks, because they're pigment inks, so they take a few minutes to dry. So once they've dried, we can then do our embossing over the top. Before I start doing that though, I want to actually show you some of the different effects you can get by using the chalk inks. So we'll just use our reverse side of our bit of cotton blend cardstock we're going to use. And to do this, rather than using the stamp press, I've just loaded the solid stamp of the rose onto an acrylic block. So usually when you're inking a solid stamp, you need to ink the whole stamp. Or if you ink part of it, you need to go over it as we did in the previous video. You go over it with a brush to break up the edge so you don't get solid edges. With chalk inks though, you can actually just ink part of the stamp and it will give you a lovely shaded effect without needing to actually do anything else to the ink. So when I stamp that down, you can see we naturally get a beautiful transition from where we've inked to where we haven't inked. And that's one of the beautiful features of this particular type of ink. The other thing that's really good about them as well is that you can layer with the same colour. Each time you use the same colour, you'll actually build up more depth without having to change to another colour. So that gives you even more prospects for layering these colours together. So let's stamp that over the top. I'm not lining up too accurately, just to give you an idea. See how we've gone to a deeper layer, and that's with using the same colour. Now, of course, once we start working with shades of colours like we've got here, so you've got Sea Breeze, Turquoise Gem and Ocean Depths that are all in the aqua family. So they'll all work beautifully together. So we can use the different colour families that Versamgic has. So a lot of their ink colours come in tones of 3 or tones of 2. So you can do a lot of layering. But you can layer with just the one colour. We could go over that again. Let me just clean that stamp off. We could go over that again with the shadow layer. Same ink. Here's me hoping that it actually works on 3 layers. And it should come out. It's still not going to be as dramatic as if we change to a different ink colour. But if we pop that in there, we should still see, and if I hold that up, maybe you can get in close, you can see that shadow pattern there. So it's soft, it's subtle, but that's just 3 layers of the same colour. Pretty special, hey? So that's one of the features of chalk inks that makes them so beautiful to work with, because you can layer them so easily. But what we're going to do today is we're going to actually layer using the 3 colours in the family, and I want to show you using with the scrap paper and not using with the scrap paper at the same time. And I think that's what I did in the road test video that we've just done, and it was probably confusing as well. So let's pop it in my precision press. I'm lining up with the numbers on my grid, so I'm lining up with number 8, using my magnets to hold it down. Then I can position my stamp, outline stamp, where I want it. Now, if I was going to use my scrap bit of paper, I would put my scrap in here, making sure I'm lined up over in the exact same spot. We work out where we want our stamp. I probably should make sure I have got it right so that when I show you the layers it all works. Now, of course, being just a very flimsy bit of paper, it's going to move. So I've got to go back over and just make sure I've got it completely lined up with my base paper, pop my magnets on it. We ink up with our VersaFine Clear Morning Mist. And then we've stamped onto our scrap, and we've got a guide to follow. Now I'm also going to do it directly on the card. Oh, I've given myself blurry vision. Okay, so directly onto the card. Ink up with our Morning Mist. Now this grey isn't going to show because I'm going to emboss the outline at the end of the card, emboss it with copper, and that will cover up this grey outline. So the grey is just, which is why I'm doing grey, not black, so that it's just there as a guide, and it will then get covered up as we layer our colours on and when we put the final embossing on. So I can clean that outline. We'll need to come back to that later. And now we start our shadow stamping. So if I was going to be using my scrap, I would layer that in here again, lining it up with my base card. Line my shadow stamp up with that. So this is if I hadn't stamped on the underlying card. We can then pick that up, take this out, and then it should be in exactly the right spot to stamp down. So that would be if we hadn't stamped that rose there. If you're happy to have your grey outline and trust that it's going to cover up with your copper embossing, which is what we're going to trust, we can just pop our solid stamp on there, lining it up completely with the edge of the grey outline. The solid stamp goes right to the edge of our outline stamp. We pick it up, double check that our paper hasn't moved, and you can see it has slightly. Because it's a solid stamp, it grips the platform quite firmly, so it can end up moving the card. Now I'm just going to, because with the precision press I can just let it sit there, and I can just have a look directly over it and make sure that that hasn't moved at all, and it looks perfect. So let's go back to our Sea Breeze colour. But this time, instead of just inking a part of it like I did in the first example, I'm going to ink the whole stamp. Lay it over, press it down. Now pigment ink, like the VersaFine Clairs, give it a moment to absorb into the card. Press up, and there we've got it beautifully lined up with our edges. Now I'm just going to clean that stamp off and not take it off the platform at this stage. Because I've made this stamp set with not too many layers to not make it too confusing, if I want to add more layers, I can do that by adding some extra colour, like we did in the last video with the Catherine Pooler inks, but we can do that with our chalk inks as well. So I'm just going to go around the edge of that stamp. And as I said, I don't need to do any, I I don't need to do any blending of the edges. It just happens naturally with this ink pad. Now let's just tap it on and it will naturally give us a soft edge. So let's pop that over as well. And that's just giving us a little bit of extra depth in there. Now, while I've got that colour on the go, I'm going to do the stem in that colour. So let's lift out that solid and we'll get our solid version of the stem. And you can see on the stamped image, there's a little bit of a notch in the flower and there's also a notch on the branch there. Plus you've got some little wavy leaves sticking out. So you can use all of those as your guides to move this stamp into place and line it up with those, and know then that you've got that solid stamp lined up where you want it. Pick it up. Just check we haven't moved too much because it is a solid stamp. Let's ink it. So this is the turquoise gem. So I could swap to greens for the stem, but I'm wanting to keep the colour scheme all in these aquas, which I think will be really pretty. Now I don't feel that I inked that well enough at the top there. So because it's in our precision press, we can just ink it again. And stamp over the top. Give it a good push down in that spot. Much better. Okay, clean that one off, and then we're going to move into our deeper colour, the ocean depths. That one into shot, there we go. So let's take out our little solid stem. While we're working on the stem, we may as well keep going, so put in the shadowy one. Now this again has a little notch that lines up with the notch there, and a little notch at the top that lines up with that base of the flower.
Did you know what colours you were going to be using today when you put your t-shirt on?
Wasn't planned around the t-shirt, no. So our turquoise t-shirts is part of our new Eclectic uniform. But no, I chose turquoise because I've chosen other colours to do in some other videos, and I thought turquoise layering with chalk inks would work really well. But if it matches my shirt, you know, that's a bonus. I'll take that one. And of course some lovely earrings from my daughter that match in with the colours as well. Just because turquoise is turquoise. Okay, so this is our solid for our stem, inking up with the deeper ocean depths. And that gives us just that extra depth in there, and that same colour we'll keep on the go because we're going to do our shadow layer on our rose with it. So you really can do your flower just with two colours and then your embossed outline, but it just so happens that I was wanting to get a little bit of a third shade in there too. Okay, so this one, the shadow one, we're going to line it up with the base of the flower again. And just watch, there is a line of a petal there that really matches to the line of the petal under here. So I'm going to make sure that I line up the base and then check that I've got that line in as well. Just do a little pushing around till I'm happy I've got it where I want it. Check my paper hasn't moved. This is the scary one. This is the one I always think if I'm going to muck it up, it's this one.
Should I add some scary music at this point?
Yeah, drum roll, all that sort of stuff. Let it sit for a moment. Not enough depth there, and I'm a little bit not lined up. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to worry about getting more depth of colour. Because again, if it's not 100% perfect, it's still going to look pretty. We do stress a lot about making everything so perfect. And sometimes they're just pretty the way they are. Let's put that pressure on. Lift up. And yeah, that's deepened that colour beautifully. Okay, so that gives us our rose with its dimensions in these beautiful soft chalk inks. Really special. So I'm actually going to grab one that I started earlier, which is already dry, so that we can now move on to the embossing and the background. Just clean that little lovely little one and put him away.
Can I just point out that your cleaning sponge and your magnet things are also
turquoise,
in those tones?
And look at my glass mat. Turquoise and pinks and purples. Are we getting a theme here? I think so. So here's the one I've already done, ready for its, and I've just put the platform away, haven't I? Okay, let's get this out because we're going to stamp our outline in Versamgic. So I'm lining up with a point on the grid so that I know if the paper has moved at all. And the one thing I haven't got standing by here on my table is my anti-static pad. So I'm just going to have to trust that that's nice and dry. Let's give it a little bit of a waft with the heat gun just to make sure. Now we'll line our outline up. So this is the one I did using our scrap bit of paper, so it doesn't have the grey outline. So if I had this one in, I would be lining up the outline with that grey outline that's already there. So that's often the easier way to work with it because you've got that guideline each step. But if you don't want to, that's where having the little test scrap piece can come in. Okay, so let's have a look at lining it up. So again, we've got that notch in the branch. We've got right out to the edge of where our solid stamp is. I'm checking the little leaves. And that all looks rather nice. Okay. Pick it up with our press. Paper's all nice and solid there. Okay, so we're going to want some Versamgic ink, and I will get my scrap paper ready and my embossing powder ready. Okay. Nice and inky with the Versamgic. Press down, make sure you press over the whole stamped area because this is one where it's very hard to redo the Versamgic. Because once you don't know whether it's enough ink until you've put the embossing powder on, and then it's too late to actually ink it up again. So you've got to make sure you get this one right. Okay, let's take it over to our scrap piece of paper. Pour plenty of copper embossing on. And then I do have a little brush standing by, so I can do my tap, tap, tap. Turn it over, do a little bit of a tap on the other side, and just check and see that I've actually got copper embossing powder over a lot of the card. That's where an anti-static pad would have been really good. Another tap on the back. That's better. Okay, a little bit down here. This is why I like the fine brush, because I can just flick away any bits that I don't want. Get them moving, do a bit of a tap. Beautiful. Okay. Embossing powder back into your jar, which again you can use the same little brush and just tap it down so you don't lose any. Make sure you don't flick it over with your hand before you've got the lid back on, or put your heat gun on and fry it before you get your... All sorts of things can go wrong with embossing powder. Okay, clean our stamp, pop it away, move everything off our workbench so that we can do some heating, and then we'll start working on our background. Okay, so we're getting ready for the background. I'm going to move up a scrap paper pad ready, because I'll be stenciling all over the edge. Get our heat gun warmed up. Loving that transition of colours that we've got going through there. A bit of curl happening in our card, so I'll do a little bit of heating from the other side. Okay, let's watch this copper change. There it goes. Copper and teal colours just works so well together. So nice. So there's our flower with its gorgeous outline. Now let's start doing some colouring around the edge. So for doing this, I'll be using my bigger brushes, my number 10 brushes, and an aqua brush. So we'll start off with just the sea breeze, the softer colour. And I'm actually going to work in a little bit with it, just with the splatter stamp to start with. Then I'll come in and brush some around the edge as well. So your splatter stamp is made up of a more solid part and a more open part. So the solid part is when we can actually build up a little bit of background colour, particularly with a soft colour like this. And this is where I realise I'm changing my mind, because this is where I was going to use the Sahara sand. So leave off the sea breeze, come in with the Sahara sand. Don't you love a change of plan halfway through? Okay, Sahara sand to build up a little bit of background colour. So I'm just going to be mainly inking that solid part, and then I start at the edge of the card and work in. That way our strongest colour is near the edge of the card. Now just be a little bit careful. I've got a fingerprint on that one from touching this ink pad with this hand and then hanging on to it. So I'm just going to make sure I wipe my hand off on my scrap cloth. I have my cleaning cloth on my lap. So I'm just going to make sure that I wipe my hand off on that so I'm not putting any more fingerprints on. Let's, on the edge, work in. It's a very satisfying stamping too, splatter stamping. You know, it's really nice just to thump it and work those colours in. Okay, I think I can inch it in a little bit more. Particularly some of these bits. Let's get a little bit more in there. Okay. Now, decision time. Do I add some more splatter with the sea breeze, or do I just brush it on? We could do either, you know. Splatter stamp is so satisfying. I think I'm going to do it with the splatter. Okay. So just checking that I haven't got ink on my fingers. Is it noisy enough, Maddie? The microphone picking up all that sound texture that we've got happening?
Sound texture, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Stamping texture and sound texture. But it's working very nicely. Okay, maybe a little bit more down the bottom edge here to match that top edge there. That's gorgeous. Okay, I'm keeping that stamp because I'm going to use it again in a moment. Just give it a quick clean. Pop this ink pad away and going to switch to the turquoise gem, and this is where I'm going to bring in the damask stencil. So we'll just swap to a slightly deeper brush, that one there. So this was a number 8 one, which will get through the fine details of the stencil, but you could easily use a number 10, or you could actually use one of your blending brushes too. All of those will work through a stencil. So let's turn the card around so you can see what I'm doing. Pop our turquoise gem out. Now I'll be looking with the stencil to again keep it to this border area and not bring it in and overlap it over the flower. So even though the stencil looks like it's coming over the whole card, we're not actually going to be colouring that much of it. I'm just checking, because its patterns are in a line, I'm just checking that I'm fairly even with the edge of the stencil and the edge of my card, just so they're a little bit straight. So let's pop some ink on and just start doing some shading. Now it will feel a bit like nothing much is happening.
It feels like nothing much is happening.
Really? Fancy having you notice that. So what I'm going to do before I move on, I'm just going to hold the stencil in place, lift it slightly, and I can see whether I'm starting to get that pattern coming through. And I'm actually getting not enough of the actual pattern. So I'm going to come in a little bit darker. Let's do a little bit of actual stippling, see if we can catch some of those curls and swirls. That's better. You can always add more ink. You can always come in and add more. It's very hard to take it away. So it's always a little bit better to go softer until you're happy with the result, and just, well, softer and then build it up until you're happy with it, rather than go in too hard and then find that you've gone too much and it's hard to take it away. And of course this will depend on your stencil. If this was a bigger swirl pattern, it might show up with a softer application of ink. Move around this side. Move in a little bit quicker. So I'm going heavier on the outer edge and then a bit softer as I come in towards the flower. And just a little bit down the bottom there. Now, as we're getting a little bit late with our time, I'm just going to take it off and hope that I'm happy with it. It would be nice to have done that checking and being a bit more subtle, but let's just move to the next stage so that we can get this one finished. So this is the Ocean Depths, the deepest colour that we've used in the flower, and we're coming back in with the open part of the splatter stamp and just adding a few extra little splats around there. Particularly in areas where maybe the stencil isn't as strong, and use different parts of the stamp. Just finish it off. So again, I do my first application near the edge, and then I can do one a bit further in, and twisting the stamp around so that I get different parts of it showing. And our last stage will be just our final swipe around the edge of the card with that deeper colour. Remember, don't go straight across with your ink pad, go on an angle. That way you don't cut into the ink pad at all with the card, and also you actually get a little bit more ink coming onto the card. And here we have our rose, what are we going to call it? Rosebud in Blues. Move it forward so Matthew can get it with the black background at the table. There's our beautiful rose. Now, being a chalk ink which dries permanent, we could come over that with a shimmer pen if we wanted to add a bit of shine. We could certainly add in some little bits of stickles. You could add some little droplets of glossy accent just to put a little bit of dew on some of the petals. All sorts of things that you could still add to it if you wanted to keep playing. So thank you very much for watching this one. I hope you enjoy seeing how the chalk inks can work with the solid stamps, and that opens up maybe some ideas if you've already got some chalk inks of what you can use on this stamp set. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time around.